Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 2 of the 4-part series where we're going to be analyzing the Aimchess Rapid tournament finals that were played between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley. So let's get right into it. So the main purpose of this series is to really dive deep and analyze each game individually rather than just briefly overview them in order to gain instructional value from each and every game. Once again, I'm going to remind you guys that the time format for this tournament is 15 minutes rapid with 3-second increment. And Wesley So opens up with c4, the English opening, and we get the 4 knights English. This is a very, very popular way to play against the English. It has been a very well-studied line, and both players are in their prep here. g3 aims to fianchetto this bishop and apply pressure on this a8 to h1 diagonal. Magnus here captures the pawn, and Wesley So fianchettos the bishop. The reason that Wesley So, for example, didn't take this knight is because this just isn't very good. Here, black's pieces are very active, and even though you set up some sort of potential, discovery attack, Magnus would have a very pleasant time here because his pieces are much more well developed, and if this knight were to move out, this bishop would be hanging with the only available square to knight h4, and that's just an awkward square for the knight, so the straight isn't favorable for white. The main move here is knight to b6, and the point is that the center is left open for your bishops, and now your knight can jump into c4 at any time. It also monitors this d5 square, and this position has been reached well over, 10,000 times, just according to the chess.com database. However, the move that Magnus Carlsen plays has only been reached 10 times in this position, and it's the move knight f6. And on paper, they seem pretty much the same. I mean, there's almost no difference from the knight being on b6 to f6. However, the knight on f6 is slightly worse because it prevents the c-pawn from ever being pushed, which means that this pawn is forever vulnerable. It's pretty much an isolated pawn at this point since, well, obviously we cannot protect it with any other pawns. And that is the main reason that people play knight b6, so that they can set up c6 ideas and add additional support for this pawn. Now Wesley So will primarily try to target this pawn and find ways to exploit this weakness. However, the one good thing about this move is that 1, this is rapid, and 2, this is Magnus Carlsen playing, so he took Wesley So out of his theory, and now he's going to employ whatever tactics he has up his sleeve. Here, Magnus Carlsen plays the move h6, and the purpose of h6 is to act as a sort of prophylactic move, but it's also a slow and developing waiting move. So what it does is it prevents bishop g5 and knight g5 ideas, but at the same time, it just waits and sort of before committing any pieces. So for example, if Magnus was to play bishop g4, we don't know if the bishop would like to stay there. For example, this knight could move and the bishop on g4 would be obsolete. So in this particular case, Magnus Carlsen opts to wait and allow Wesley So to decide what his plans are before proceeding. Wesley So plays a3, so kind of strikes back at Magnus with the same energy, just hits him with another waiting move, and a move that prevents bishop b4. And here Magnus is finally forced to commit to a move, so he plays bishop d6. And we get b4, which is a very interesting move. It's very ambitious in the sense that, well, you're pretty much creating a minority attack on the queen side here, preparing, a5 and b5, and trying to take as much space as you can. But the problem with b4 is that it's very weakening on the light squares, and this can become a weakness later on in the game. However, b4 is a very good move because it allows Wesley So to place his bishop on b2 and just get a very active and nice position. Castles. Wesley So plays d3, and the point of d3 is to prevent any sort of e4 shenanigans because, well, this pawn is isolated, it's a weakness, so it's important to control the square in front of it just to prevent it from ever, getting pushed and becoming an asset. And this way, Wesley So can easily create some sort of attack on this pawn by playing, for example, bishop b2 and then moving this knight out of the way. So d3 is a very nice move. Magnus plays rook e8, we get bishop b2, and we get a6. And a6 is once again a waiting move, because Magnus is not exactly sure where he wants to place his bishop, but a6 is a little bit slow, and it gives white just a tiny bit of advantage. Wesley So plays rook c1, and the purpose of rook c1 is just to take control of the c-file, so maybe like 10, 15, 20 moves down the line, this rook will become very powerful. Finally, we get bishop e6 out of Magnus, so he's finally activated all of his pieces, and then knight a4. Knight a4 is a great move because it does 2 things. 1, it sets up knight c5, which is a very, very nice outpost square for this knight. And 2, it opens up this bishop, which targets this pawn with this knight. Now this pawn is an even larger target. So Magnus plays the move queen d7, which pretty much forces a trade of bishop for a knight here. So Wesley So has the bishop pair. However, this rook is on an awkward square. And once again, this showcases why rook c1 was important, because had the rook been on a1 in this particular position, for example, he would have been forced to take with his b pawn, and in turn, he would create two isolated pawns, which would have been very awkward to deal with. Now, in this position, we can notice one thing. The e pawn is hanging. 3 of Wesley So's pieces attack this pawn, with the knight, the bishop, and the rook, whereas only Magnus's knight defends this pawn. This pawn is indefensible. So Magnus finds a very, very clever move, and that is the whole reason why he played queen e7, and sets up bishop h3. And on paper, this move may seem not impressive, but this bishop is very important to the game, actually, because it is the main protector of the king, and so it's one of the more important pieces. And by playing this move, Magnus finds compensation with the fact that he's going to dislodge this bishop and make Wesley So's position a lot weaker. So we get this trade of pieces, and Wesley So takes a seemingly free pawn. However, there is an issue with this move. And this move allows two different knight moves, and both of them work perfectly fine, but this game is pretty much equal at this point. Knight g4, which is a very nice move. It sets up queen takes h2, and it also attacks his bishop, because there's now 3 pieces staring at this bishop and only 2 protecting it. So if black was somehow able to get this knight out of f3, then this game would have been completely lost for Wesley So. And the move that Magnus played, which was knight d7, and this forced both the rook and the bishop, and basically what happens is this game becomes suddenly super unbalanced. So we went from a very non-confrontational position where both players were slowly moving their pawns, waiting for someone to commit, to an extremely unbalanced and a very, very sharp game. And in the sense that Wesley So is going to win 2 pawns and a piece, but is going to lose a rook. So material-wise, they're going to be equal, but the game is going to be completely unbalanced. Wesley So takes the c7 pawn. This is the only move that keeps equality. Here we get a nice move from Magnus, which is rook c8. It's a nice intermediate move. Obviously, it could have started with this knight takes rook, but rook c8 just develops with tempo, and so it forces the bishop to retreat. Alternatively, also, Wesley So could have taken this knight, and we would have got the exact same position, just with a pawn on c6. There's no real big difference. The engine views both positions as equal. So after bishop f4, he takes this rook, and now we've got a very unbalanced and a very, very interesting game. Here, Magnus plays a very nice move that a lot of people would struggle to find, including myself. And what he does is basically he acknowledges the fact that this king is very well protected, and there are no pieces that can attack the king alongside the queen. So this attack is very obsolete in this position. It's useless. And so he retreats the queen back to a very active square. Now, what does this do? Well, it attacks this e2 pawn, and it puts the queen on a much more active square where it's able to navigate around the board and oversee a lot of action. Wesley So plays e3. He also could have played rook e1, which I think was a little bit more flexible because e3 prevents the bishop from ever retreating. We get knight e7 with opening up the line of fire on the c5 pawn. And we get knight d4 attacking the queen, forcing the queen to move. And now there are 2 pieces that attack this pawn. Wesley So defends the pawn in a beautiful move with bishop to d6. Obviously, even though that there are 2 pieces which attack this pawn, this trade is not favorable because the rook is worth 5 material, whereas the bishop and the pawn is worth 4. And we get b6. The purpose of b6 is that if this capture were to occur, this bishop would be completely hanging and free to take. So Magnus Carlsen basically just applies more pressure on this pawn. Wesley So captures this knight, and now Magnus takes his pawn. And the reason he didn't take the bishop right away is because then this would have just been the free pawn, and might have been a little bit better here. So Magnus Carlsen captures the pawn first, and Wesley So recaptures, and we get this exchange. Here, a very cool thing I want to point out is the best move, and something that I've analyzed and thought was very cool, is bishop to f6. Why? Okay, well, if g takes f6, we've ruined black's pawn structure, and now this knight just moves to e2. If this knight gets captured, we play queen g4, and now there's a mate threat. And after g6, the queen takes, queen takes, queen takes. Now we get a completely equal position because the bishop here is very active and these pawns are very strong. Whereas in the game, what happened was this bishop captured, the rook took, and this knight is a little bit awkward on d4. This rook is very active and it's very easy to double up. So this was just a slight inaccuracy on Wesley So's part. We get queen e4 from Wesley So, very nice move. It attacks this rook and attacks this pawn. Magnus Carlsen plays rook c8, which is a slight inaccuracy. Apparently it was better to protect this pawn. However, he saw that the counterplay he would have received from playing rook c1 was greater than the worth of 1 pawn. Wesley So plays h4, and h4 just a little bit too slow. Point of h4 is to open up squares for the king to escape eventually, But what Wesley so missed was this capture. And after king e2, the move that the engine suggests here is queen h5. And if the king runs away to d1, d2, there's queen d1 mate. If the knight blocks, let's say, if the knight blocks the check, let's say, we get rook c2 check. No matter where the king goes, this knight gets lost. So let's say king e1, we take the knight. If king d1 in an attempt to take this rook, we just play rook takes f2, and now this knight is lost no matter what, because the knight can move since it's pinned. The queen has a pin or the knight, and the game would have been lost. And the move here would have been f3, but f3 is super weakening because all of these pawns are all of a sudden targets now, and Magnus could have played something like this and would have been completely winning in this position. However, Magnus Carlsen did not find that. And in fact, after h4, Magnus Carlsen played king h7. The purpose of king h7 is to avoid backplaying mate opportunities for white, and just to remove any chance of white giving a check and potentially escaping. Wesley so brings the queen to a4 in order to monitor this d1 square to avoid some sort of queen h1, queen d1 mate. We get this trade. Magnus plays queen h1. Wesley so plays queen b3. We get rook e1 check. King d2 is forced. We get rook b1 attacking the queen. And here, Wesley so blunders mate in 1 with the move queen to c2. And Magnus Carlsen finds the mate with queen e1 mate. This was an unbelievable game. It was really balanced for the most part, but unfortunately it seems like Wesley So's sight really affected him. He seemed very visibly upset after losing the first game, which, I mean, very understandable. But that sums up everything I wanted to show you guys for the second game of this Rapid Aimchess tournament. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you for part 3. Thank you for watching.